Good afternoon, everyone. Wonderful, wonderful to see all of you. Mostly unfamiliar faces, a few familiar ones. And that's great. It's just really nice to see a lot of, not people saying, oh, it's him again. A lot of people for whom this, some of these ideas, and certainly the content of our new book is going to be fresh and new. So I want to put it all into context for you, and then we're all going to dive in. So we think about marketing, we think about what people say about it, what people do about it, and it's this. And it's very troubling because so much, when we talk about marketing, we talk about the stuff that marketers do. We obsess over action, okay? It's just all these tactical kinds of things out there. But very often, lost in the conversation is who we do it to, or I'd rather say who we do it with. It's almost an afterthought. We have all of these shiny objects, many of which were invented and promoted right through this company here. And we're just, out there playing with toys. And I always found that very troubling for kind of obvious reasons as well as some subtle ones, that we really want to spend a little bit more time thinking about them. And that motivated the first book that I wrote back in 2012. And it was really nice to kind of get people to focus a little bit more on the whole customer thing. And it was a very nice success. We sold over 30,000 copies of it. But even then, it didn't quite do the job. You see, the problem is that too many people would read the title. They wouldn't read the subtitle. They'd read the title and they'd say, aha, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I fully agree. It's all about this. We put the customer at the center of everything we do. And that just kills me. Because that's not what we're talking about. And maybe it's my fault for choosing a really bad title, but it's really less about the customer, and it's more about an appreciation of this wide variety of customers, and which ones are the ones we really do want to focus on. So again, the book was a nice way to start the conversation, but I spent so much of my time talking about what I don't mean by customer centricity. And one thing I surely don't mean is that the customer is always right, and we will do anything for you. We're going to hire an army of ninjas to make sure that every need you have is met, every problem you have is solved. That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm also not talking about the opposite end of the spectrum, which is we got the customers we want, we got the customers we don't want, let's get rid of them. Life will be much easier. Okay, that has problems too. And again, I don't want to go into the details. If you want, you can pick up the old book. And then maybe the main point, and the whole reason I wrote the book, to go back to the research that I do, is to get people, to get companies to stop focusing on the past and spend a little bit more time obsessing over the future. So instead of focusing on historic profitability, let's think about this idea of customer lifetime value. And is it fair to say that every one of you, whether you're working with these models or not, at least has those letters, whether they're CLV or LTV, as part of your vocabulary? You're at least conversant with the base. That by itself is a really great thing. So part of it is overcoming myths and misconceptions about what we mean by customer centricity. And part of it is we just didn't go far enough with it. That book was all about definition. It was all about motivation. It was all about aspiration. It was just kind of laying out just a vision of what the world could look like if we had a magic wand and we could wave it over each customer's head. But it kind of stopped short of specifics. And so that's really where we want to go. So how do we really do this stuff? How do we communicate it internally, externally? And how do we demonstrate that it's actually worthwhile? Or is it just another marketing flavor of the month kind of thing, and it too will pass? We don't believe that at all. And so we really wanted to find ways to really move this conversation forward, again, not just in terms of definitions and motivations, but in terms of actions. And so Sarah Toms enters the picture because she and I developed this really great customer centricity simulation. A lot of you have done some kind of business simulation game. We have the product, and let's figure out, with the product, which segments are we going to sell it to, and how much money are we going to spend on the product. And it gets back to all that marketing mix, 4 Ps, tactical kind of stuff. Well, how about a simulation where it's your job to grow as profitable a customer base as possible? The product is secondary, the customers are primary. So that really helped. That started to move the conversation along. But there's still a lot of room to go. We're trying every possible thing, but we just need kind of broader and deeper adoption across firms. And I look at all the different reasons why people start to think about this stuff. Is it, hey, we can make more money if we have our CLV magic wand and we allocate our resources appropriately? Or is it, hey, nothing else is working for us, and out of sheer desperation, what the hell, we'll try that too. Whatever the reason, we need to find a way, and we need to find a metaphor to try to get people on board with this stuff. And so all the time, I'm just thinking about, you know, tools and models and simulations and stuff like that. Sarah Toms enters the picture, literally and figuratively, to give us a really nice way to kind of to take the conversation to a higher level.
Exactly. So when Pete and I were writing this book together, a lot of our conversation was about the call to action that we wanted to generate around customer centricity. And when you think about this opportunity and desperation that really is mounting in the marketing and sales field, it reminded me of what happened in the mid-90s in software development. So I entered the tech field in the mid-90s, the dawn of .com. A really, really wonderful time to be an entrepreneur. I started my first tech company, and like most entrepreneurs entering technology at the time, was incredibly excited and ready for the challenge. The problem was, in reality, when I started working with my clients, is that the first thing I would be asked for is a lot of documentation. I was following the waterfall process like I was being told to. My tech team was really not able to deliver in the same way and to the objectives of what we were trying to do as a business. And one of the problems was with technology at the time was we were following old processes that were quite literally decades old. They were not fast, they were not agile, and they were really being dictated to us by bureaucracies such as the US government, who at the time was the largest developer of software. So a great example of this, when the space shuttle went into the stratosphere in 1982, it had technology on board that was quite literally from the 60s. Software took sometimes between 6 and 2 decades to deliver. And what that led to was the software development crisis in the 1990s. So this is where hardware, PCs were sitting on desktops, they were moving into homes, and software quite literally could not keep up. So what we saw here is this timeline where there were a few rogue software development teams who were like, there's got to be a better way. They were probably looking at Deming and what he was doing with the iterative processes in quality assurance and in manufacturing, which was more of an iterative approach, a more lightweight approach. And what really started to happen with these pioneers in technology was they decided that it was time to all come together to draw a line in the sand, or the snow, because they all came together in Snowbird, Utah in 2001, and they decided to declare their independence from the old ways of doing software. And here you have the Agile Manifesto, which was written in 2001. Now, it's kind of quirky, and this is still the website today, by the way. It looks still very 1996 or 2001. They wrote a clear definition for a vision and what needed to be done in software in particular, and what was the way forward for how to develop. A way that would be lean, a way that would bring the customer or the user to the center of the design, a way that was more iterative so that they could course correct, and most importantly, so that they could communicate with one another and also with the business stakeholders who software was being developed for. And this was an amazing time for all of us who were in software at the time when we saw this manifesto come to life and when we started to see it being adopted. So, stupid question, really. Did Agile work? You guys are all looking at me like, of course it did, sir. So here's some study information from Gartner study and other global studies that have been done on Agile in 2018. No surprise here, 97% of organizations have adopted even a small amount of Agile within their organization. What we really love, what Pete and I are really excited about, is this down here, is that it's no longer just a software process or approach. It's now being adopted by financial teams, by middle management teams. It's been adopted as a way by lean startup. It's been adopted as a way forward to deliver great stuff. It is product-centric, I will admit that as well. And of course, I had to put some Google search results. Also in these Gartner studies, when agile projects are implemented, they're 3 times more successful. For complex projects, 6 times more successful. So clearly, this was the right way to go. What you see here with these adoption curves since the 1900s, and what, if any of you have been in a marketing class or in a business class, what you're seeing is they're speeding up. Adoption is faster. Right here is where the manifesto happened. And for a lot of you, you're probably thinking, well, it's just, processing power is better. We're getting better at tech. But what I actually believe, somebody who's been in the technology sphere now for over 20 years, is it's really been this shift in how we create technology together. And I believe that the Agile Manifesto was that sort of ignition point, that it was that tipping point that allowed us to be able to support the innovation and now the adoption that has gone along with it.
So let's take that real story and now use it as a metaphor for kind of the data analytics customer centricity thing. Because right now, a lot of companies believe that we're on the verge of another tipping point because we have so much data, we have so much computing power, we have so much analytical capabilities that we're just going to combine all this stuff together and money is just going to come raining down from the sky. We're going to see the same kind of just breakthrough in terms of success, not in terms of hard goods or services, but in terms of just our analytical and customer-centric smarts. Well, that's not going to happen. And I've really learned that the hard way, because again, for years and years and years, I've been going to companies and saying, here's the CLV model, please use it. And not only was it hard to get adoption on it, but even when companies would adopt it, so how do we make money on it? So I really believe it's less about the ingredients and more about the process. And so staying with this metaphor, we're kind of talking about how do we make that process go better. And so we've had all these conversations very often around the SIM and so on. And so, how do we get that overall call to action? And of course, it's up to Sarah Toms to come up with the right answer. Let's create our own manifesto. And so I'm very pleased, very, very pleased to present for the very first time to an audience here in the US. Are you ready for it? Drum roll, please. Good enough. The Customer Centricity Manifesto. So literally taking a page out of their book, making it just a little bit prettier. And basically coming up with an organizing set of principles and then underlying specific tactical practices, which is what we're going to talk about with you this afternoon, to say, let's all agree on this. Let's make this happen, and let's figure out both how to get buy-in internally as well as externally. So we spent a bunch of time, and I'll be super honest with you. We basically had this SIM. We put together basically a software manual just to kind of help people play the game. We said, that's not enough. We want to help them play the game smarter. And again, we realized it was more than just saying, here's how you calculate CLV. It was more about the mindset that you're going to take on when you approach this kind of exercise, whether it's simulated or whether it's real. If you're interested, you can go to customer-centricitymanifesto.org, sign the manifesto, show that you agree, spread the gospel about it. And that's all we want to talk about, is to basically take each one of these 4 principles over here and just bring it to life. So let's start with this first one over here, the idea of that we're going to really celebrate customer heterogeneity over averages. So, when you start thinking about, okay, all right, I got you, customers are different from each other, what immediately comes to mind is that pain and suffering that you went through in your introductory statistics course, where that professor, and pretty much every professor since then, said everything follows a normal distribution. And so stands to reason that would be the same thing with your customers. You're going to get this nice symmetric mix. You got the good ones, you got the not so good ones, you got this big lump in the middle, and depending on just how it's shaped, you might say, there's so many over here that we really can focus on the average. Well, the problem is this never happens. That's just not true. And it's something that I've known for quite some time, but it really, really crystallized through my first startup company called Zodiac that some of you might be familiar with. Don't Google it now because it's gone. I'll tell you why. And basically what we were doing is we were working with lots of different companies, wonderful variety of companies, products and services, B2B and B2C, domestic and international, big and small, and we'd just calculate the CLVs and say, here you go, now go make money. And the distribution of CLVs that we'd see would pretty much always look like this. Very much not normal. And it's not only that it's not normal, but it also gives you a lot of specific advice and direction, like, who are these customers over here? What makes them different from everybody else? And how can we find more like them? That's what customer centricity is all about. And so recognizing the nature of this distribution is really critical to kind of drive you in that direction and hopefully motivate you to look for this kind of stuff and then, of course, act on it. The bottom line on the Zodiac thing, for those of you who don't know, is just a couple of months ago, we actually sold the company to Nike. And now they're doing just amazing, wonderful things with CLV. You know, again, a company that used to be very product-centric, but now doing just incredible things by understanding their customers and doing all the stuff that we're talking about here. Got a really nice story for you. It's more than just distributions. It's more than just math. It's about how do we get other people to celebrate customer heterogeneity. Did some work with a small B2B manufacturer down in Norfolk, Virginia. So kind of a very different kind of company than a lot of companies that you would think about when we're talking about CLV. And the CEO found it very frustrating that after I had this session, kind of get everyone all juiced up and jazzed up about customer centricity, that he'd listen to the conversations that were taking place a day, a week, a month later, and everyone was still talking about the customer or the average customer. He found it frustrating. He said, tell you what, this is what we're going to do. So he put a fishbowl right there in the company lunchroom, and he said, I want all of you to listen. I want all of you to police each other. And any time you hear a colleague refer to the customer in a singular manner, and they're not referring to a singular customer, anytime you hear people just talk about the customer or the average customer, you call them on it. You say, I got you. And they have to put $1 in the fishbowl. And it was a really fun way to get people to really think about this one idea all the time. Nothing about tactical execution, just the mindset. And in no time at all, they had a fishbowl filled with dollars, very visible for everyone to see. And at the end of the quarter or whenever it was, the CEO said, you know what? We're going to have a party now using all that money. And what is it that we're going to celebrate? Customer heterogeneity. So it comes full circle like that. And it's just a clever little way. I want everyone to go out there and buy a fishbowl right now for yourself or for your clients. But it's just a clever little way to say, again, it's not just about geeky math stuff. It's about figuring out how to get that message across. So that's principle number one. Let me hand things back to Sarah. Let's keep on going.
Okay, so from customer heterogeneity, principle number 2 is cross-functional uses of CLV over siloed applications. So when Pete and I set out to write this book, it was really, really important to us that we didn't, again, create something that's just going to sit right in the marketing silo. This is something that we need to ignite conversations across the functional areas. It's why when you delve into the book, we have parts where we're talking about how you engage with your technology teams and you talk about data, how you work with finance, how you work with the other areas to really start to get that conversation going, like Pete's last example, talking about making sure that folks aren't thinking just about the customer. So what I want to do here is just share a couple of really interesting examples. These are not examples in the book, brand new for you folks. Batteries plus bulbs, no prizes if you can guess what they sell. So they have been, they are here in the United States. They are 700 stores. And they are just a pretty usual hard goods, brick and mortar selling, what do you think? Batteries and bulbs, exactly. Good job, guys. So what I like about this example, and Pete and I both know the former chief customer analytics gentleman, and he has shared with us some incredible evolution of the use of CLV within their company. So they started small, they started experimental, and it's now grown into being a cross-functional experience for them when they think about their business, when they think about their customers, and how they engage with their customers in different ways based on CLV. Higher value customers are going to want to be engaged with differently than their lower value customers, for example. So when they have their customers coming to them through their website, through their call centers, through retail, they have ways of capturing that behavioral data. So for example, using a natural language API that's collecting all of this behavioral data about their customers, and they know which ones are going to behave a certain way, are more likely to have higher value, versus which ones are behaving a certain way are going to have lower and middle tiered value. And all that gets pumped up every single day into Salesforce. And by the next day, they've created lists sorted by CLV for their Salesforce. Those are now target lists that they can go after. And then they cycle back the performance of those lists back to those various areas, and they improve on those algorithms all the time. So it's a nice iterative process where they're really leveraging CLV. And not just that, the company's been very successful. They're constantly expanding. They're looking at mom and pop shops that they can acquire, and they use CLV for that. That's one of their key indicators for where are they going to go, which store are they going to buy, which store are they going to put in. Second really cool example, a little bit more exciting maybe for some of you than batteries and bulbs, is Electronic Arts. So gaming company, we do actually speak about sort of their origin story as far as customer centricity. They are very, very mature in the customer centricity space as far as how they are leveraging CLV. Their data analytics teams are actually embedded into their gaming studios, so that when they do game launches, they're feeding back that game data and the CLV data real time to the studio developers, and letting them know, were you successful with this feature? Were you successful with this game, et cetera? So last year in November, they had Command & Conquer Rivals, was just launched. And they knew that they didn't know anything about really their customer base when they launched. And so their advertising looked like this. So this was November 2018. You'll notice that we have a pretty good gender representation. They're playing around with some imagery as far as some of the different weaponry, et cetera. Fast forward 1 month, they're starting to collect initial customer data and information. By December 2018, they've started to make some small adaptations to that. You can see it here. And then by December 2018, and then, sorry, by January 2019, they realized something. They realized that who was bubbling to the top as far as CLV were teenage boys in North America. So you'll see here, women really have fallen out of being represented in their ads. You'll also see that there's a lot more left to right because of the left to right reading, where the call to action is, et cetera, et cetera. So this is another great example of acquisition where CLV is being leveraged to help guide the way.
But sometimes the best examples is not just getting smarter about which kinds of customers to acquire and how much to spend to do so and where to find them, but it's what do we do with the existing customers? Because this has been kind of a bit of a mess for a lot of companies, because companies know what to do with those existing customers when it comes to trying to make them more valuable. And they'll ask those two great American questions, which you all know so well. Do you want fries with that, and do you want to supersize it? Which, of course, we're using as accurate but kind of cutesy versions or proxies for. What's that top one? Well, got to be careful about it, right? The top one is going to be cross-selling. People who buy this also buy that. And the bottom one will be upselling. And the problem today is that this is how we fatten up our customers, whether it's like what they're eating or what we're presenting to them. And that's all companies know. And so we're taking all of this technology just to figure out how to cross-sell and upsell better, faster, more effectively. And we're thinking, can't we do better than that? Can't we come up with just different ways of kind of growing the value of customers or growing the value of the customer base outside of just doing old school stuff a little bit differently? So we took a step back and rethought about these kinds of tactics through the lens, through the mindset of customer centricity. And we came up with two dimensions. They're kind of obvious in hindsight, but they don't show up a lot in practice. The first dimension would be, which kinds of customers are we talking about either making more valuable or just holding on to? That, as Sarah has said, and as it's entirely obvious, the kinds of tactics we use should vary based on whether we're talking about really valuable customers or so-so ones. That should be explicitly taken into account, not just to say which kind of cross-sell message we're going to be using for you, but what kind of overall tactic we should be deploying. Different kinds of tactics for different kinds of customers. That's number one. Number two, when it comes to retention and development, you kind of get the basic idea the right way, which is development is let's take those existing customers and make them more valuable. Retention is let's hold on to the customers we have. But there's a lot of crossover, especially in the tactical execution of those things, where they kind of start to blur together. We want to break it apart and make it more explicit about what kind of strategic objective do we really have in mind. Are we playing offense or are we playing defense? And again, for which kinds of customers. So if you take these two dimensions, you get what every marketing professor is contractually obligated to share with you, a 2x2 matrix. And so basically we're trying to come up with an overall organizing framework that, again, from the customer-centric standpoint, we ask the question, which kind of tactic are we going to use at which time for which kinds of strategic objective and for which kinds of customers. And I'm not going to take you through the whole thing, but we just want to bring clarity not only to which tactic you're going to use when, but even what do we exactly mean by these different kinds of tactics. So just as one example, there's one area over here, the idea of premium offerings. You got these high-value customers. Don't give them a buy 9, get 1 free thing. I mean, really? Can't you do better than that? These are the people who, for whatever reason, very strongly identify with you. They like the products you sell. They like the way that you sell them. They resonate with the brand, with the people. For a variety of reasons, these are the folks who are going to go through the gates of hell to stay with you. And you know what? They don't mind going even deeper into the relationship. They don't mind paying more. Not that you want to gouge them. You don't want to risk the relationship. But lots of opportunities, starting with some of the real well-known ones like LinkedIn Premium. So how many of you are LinkedIn Premium folks? Raise your hand proudly if you're a LinkedIn Premium. This is my point. Okay? It is a premium service. It is not for everybody. Okay? But for those 1 or 2 people who put their hands up, LinkedIn means a great deal to you, right? And so there's lots of other companies out there that have been a little bit too shy to do this. Twitter. Don't you think our president would pay a premium to kind of? I'm just saying, and I'm not joking about that. There's a lot of people out there, myself included, who actually would happily pay whatever it would be, $7, $8 a month, and to get extra value-added services that maybe they couldn't justify offering to everybody. A recent example would be Lululemon. Lululemon recently announced what the press is calling a new loyalty program, but it has a little twist to it because you have to pay a bunch of money up front to be part of it. That's not a loyalty program. That's a premium service. So let's bring clarity to what label we're using on which tactic and at what time we're using it. And I'm not going to go into the rest of the details here. Read the book, page 44. It's all right there. But really using this as the lens to look at a lot of the tactical things that companies are doing, customer experience, and just so many other things that are going on out there. Where does it fit, and does it make sense to use it or not? So that's just giving you kind of the tip of the iceberg on a broad variety of different kinds of applications of all the CLV stuff. That it's going to be more than just your standard kinds of how much should we pay for the customer kind of thing. There's much more to say. Point number 3. This one over here, we want companies to choose their metrics very, very carefully. You see, the problem is, very often, even companies that are kind of data-driven and metric-oriented are choosing the metrics that reflect their strategic orientation, which means they're very much focused on, well, volume and cost. And a really good example that might be surprising to some of you is this one over here. People love this one over here. So let's look at the world's most valuable brands, right? And I can show this with pride over here because you know that Google is towards the top of the list. And people just like, I could just leave this up here, for the rest of our time. You could just stare at it quite happily. But I actually have a bunch of concerns about it. I think they're very serious concerns, and I think that companies are just obsessing over this kind of thing because it's kind of shiny and cool, but it's not aligned with customer-centric thinking. Now, having said that, I'm not throwing branding under the bus. Branding is still really important, and that's what I want to do here. I want to talk both about how should we be thinking about metrics and what is the role of branding in the customer-centric enterprise. So what are some of my concerns about this idea of brand equity? Number one, I think there's kind of a bit of a backwards causality thing going on. Like Google was not near the top of the list back in the late 90s. It wasn't until it became a behemoth company, and then, everyone knows the brand, it's top of mind. Oh, lots of brand equity there. So I think a lot of that brand equity really just reflects volume, just the overall size of the company. You don't see anyone showing to you, here's a chart of the companies with the highest average customer lifetime value. You don't see that one, and that is what I want to start to talk about, okay, to kind of put those kinds of metrics front and center. And secondly is this point over here. Can we really measure brand equity with that kind of precision? If you go back to that slide and you see that they're measuring the value of the Google brand or Apple or whomever else with 6 significant figures. I defy you to find a single chief financial officer on the planet who would say, yeah, I buy that. I mean, we'll all agree that the Google brand is incredibly valuable. We'll all agree that the brand and everything that it stands for could well be worth on the order of, hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars. But could we really specify it to 6 or 7 decimal places? I don't think so. So we have a couple of objectives over here, which is to try to come up with metrics that we really can trust, that we really can share across the organization instead of just a bunch of marketers flattering themselves with it, but also reflect more about customer equity instead of brand equity. In my first book, I had a picture that looked kind of like this. And it basically said, customer equity is not for everybody. There are some companies where it's going to be hard to measure, it's going to be hard to leverage it, and there's going to be other companies out there that are just great at building, terrific brands. Good for them. That's fine. Let them be. They don't have to do the customer-centric thing. But as time goes by, as I have these conversations with lots and lots of executives, I'm kind of changing my tune on it. Because I've come to realize that a lot of the things that on the surface could lead to a really strong brand but don't necessarily show up in customer equity, I don't believe it. That what are the kinds of things like, we can go out there and we can hire great employees, or we can get special tax breaks and other privileges from government, things that don't necessarily show up immediately as more customers buying more stuff at higher margins. But if you think about it over the long run view, which is kind of what we like to have, so what if you can hire better employees? Big deal, good for you. Unless those employees can help you bring in more customers who will buy more often at higher margins, there's no equity in it. So pretty much all of the things that I used to say belong over here really are subsumed by this. And so the picture we have in the book now looks a little bit more like this. Okay? And so there's a couple of important points about it. Number one, customer equity is going to be potentially larger, that it's going to subsume all of those elements of brand equity and just a lot of the boring transactional stuff. Number two, there could still be some aspects of brand equity that we don't pick up. It's just not going to be that much, not going to be that substantial. But important, number three, is that a huge chunk of the customer equity will be associated with the brand. Having an awesome brand will enable you to acquire better customers a little bit more cheaply. It will enable you to hold on to them a little bit longer with lower costs to keep them around. So branding absolutely helps maintain and magnify that customer equity. It's just that you can't measure it directly. It's just folded into all of the stuff that shows up in lifetime value. And so a lot of people read my first book and kind of took me as a brand hater. That he's against branding. No. I'm just concerned about brand measurement and the kind of the podium that we put it on. And so the kind of happy middle ground that I and that Sarah have found is this over here. Is that, as I said, branding is super hard to measure by itself. And in many cases, it's super hard to see the specific effects that it will have on different customers. So let's not try to do all of that measurement. It's just going to make us cuckoo. But it does show up in so many ways, and those are important ways. And so the metaphor that we like to use over here is that branding is really the lubrication for the customer centricity engine. That you can't do the customer-centric thing as well as possible unless you have branding that's going to help you do acquisition, retention, development, employees, and all that stuff a lot better. So it's important. You need to invest in it. It's much harder to measure the ROI on those investments than it might be for some, kind of direct marketing campaign or something like that. You need to run a lot of experimentation to figure it out. So it's still there, but it's just an overall component of customer equity. We just want to change the way that people are thinking about those kinds of metrics. There's a few other metrics, too, that are worth talking about. Some I'm sure that you're quite familiar with.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So I want to recognize the fact that it's not a new idea. Thinking about your customers and different, that they perform differently, that they work differently. This actually was first, from modern times anyway, launched in this book by Frederick Reichheld. So he's a Bain consultant, principal at Bain, and he wrote this book in 1996. It's called The Loyalty Effect. And what he wanted to do in this book is really explain that there's a mechanism, there's a way that customers behave. And really, instead of trying to push as much product blindly to as many faceless, nameless customers, what you really should be doing is looking at the behaviors of your customers, learning what those are, and then working to really reduce the friction in that relationship. And what happens when you reduce the friction in the relationship, especially with your higher value customers, is you grow their value. And when you grow their value, you reduce the cost that they cost you to have as their customers. And as you reduce the costs, you have this virtuous cycle start to happen where the next thing you know, they see you as a trusted advisor. And they're going to start referring other customers to you. So in this book, Reichheld really was aiming to just describe that this mechanism exists. It's different for different types of customers. And it was really that first seed of an idea that I think was going to eventually lead to customer centricity. So in his first book, he was really aiming to explain sort of the nature of customers. And then fast forward to 2006, and he released this book, The Ultimate Question. And what he was driving at in this book was really understanding how to measure that. And so I'm sure you'll not be surprised to see the measurement being Net Promoter Score. So I know that there are probably a lot of detractors in here as far as NPS goes. There definitely are some haters, and we want to recognize that. But the reason Pete and I like this was the first time, NPS really was one of the first times that it elevated this idea of customer differences in sort of our business sense. So let's look at NPS through a customer-centric lens. So some of the reasons Pete and I like NPS, number one, it celebrates customer heterogeneity. Number two, it gives an elite status to the promoters. So in the equation, the promoters definitely have an elite status. Third, it's simple. It's an easy way to have a conversation about your different customers, and it's an easy way to really evaluate them and slice and dice and look at them across different segments to really understand your customers more. Now, we recognize that, NPS has been implemented blindly. Pete and I would probably complain about things like it's been implemented too narrowly. There are ways that it could be looked at beyond referral. And really, the biggest problem with NPS is it doesn't take into account value. So it's missing a key component of that relationship with the customer.
So NPS is a great step in the right direction, and really understanding the interplay between NPS and CLV is a great area of research that's going on right now. But it really does get to this idea that, okay, it's one thing to come up with the right metrics that reflect customer-centric practices, but it's a whole other thing to figure out how to get them out there so people believe you, that you really are doing this kind of stuff and doing it well. And you know what? We understand that maybe you're not maximizing your profits this quarter, but by doing the right things in terms of customer centricity, that it's going to be so well worth it in the long run. So let me just go through this fourth point with a very interesting and very contemporary case study. You all know Wayfair, online furniture company. It's another good news and bad news story. First, from Wayfair's perspective, the good news. Look at those revenue numbers. Everyone's dream come true. That hockey stick convex curve, revenues through the roof. My concern, going back to point number 3, is that this just reflects overall volume. I want to know more about the quality of those revenues. Instead of just saying how many dollars are flowing in the door, I want to understand the nature of the customers who are bringing in those dollars. I mean, you have to believe that a sale to a new, unproven customer is going to be different in terms of lifetime value enhanced than the fourth sale to someone who's been around with you before. So let's peel that apart. And one of the problems is, with most companies, it's just impossible to do so. How would you be able to take all of this revenue and decompose it into the CLVs? Well, one of the things that I give Wayfair a lot of credit for is that they make it easy. So if you look at their own financial statements, this is a paper that I wrote with Dan McCarthy. We're basically using data from Wayfair and from another company, Overstock.com, that you might know, that also reveals a lot of really interesting metrics, the right kinds of metrics that external stakeholders want to see and should demand to see. Well, here's their data. So in addition to giving us revenues, okay, fine, that's not surprising, they give us a lot more metrics, like how many customers did we add this quarter? Okay, that's not that surprising. A lot of companies will give us that kind of metric, but again, it's not required. Accounting standards boards don't say anything about that. Some companies just voluntarily choose to put that out there. This might help you understand us better. But it's the other two metrics that really make them unique. You can see them right here. One of them is QTO, quarterly total orders. They are telling us how many orders are being placed on their website every quarter. This is all public data. And the last one over here, AAU, I bet you can guess what that is. What is AAU? Annual active users. Again, I take your silence as a sign that we have a long way to go here. We really want to make these kinds of metrics part of the everyday vocabulary. And we're not just waiting for some companies to charitably provide them to us for reasons I don't even understand, but for investors, for analysts, for marketing professionals to demand them so we can really understand how those dollars are working. Here's the cool part about it. You give me these metrics, or you can give them to Dan McCarthy, this was part of his dissertation, and I can peel back the onion and look at the nature of heterogeneity of this company almost as accurately as if I had the raw transaction log data. Now, for Wayfair, I don't, and they're not going to give it to me. They don't like me very much over there. You'll see why. But that's what we're going to do, is instead of just saying, here's revenue today, this is what revenue is going to be tomorrow, we're going to peel it all back. And let's understand the components, the customer-centric components of revenue. So let's forecast, how many customers will we acquire? How long will those customers stay with us? How many transactions will they make over that horizon? And how valuable will those transactions be? I hope you agree with me on two things. Number one, those would be really good things to know. Again, as an outside evaluator of the firm, you got to tell me that. And number two, if you add all that stuff up, that's revenue. So we're going to come at revenue from the bottom up. So we're going to take all of this data, these columns that you see over here, and we're going to model it through May of 2017, and we're going to show how well we can capture all of these patterns. So here's how many customers we've added, here's the total orders, down here is revenue. But I want to emphasize that we're not modeling revenue directly. That's what the people on Wall Street do. We're modeling, here we go again, how many customers are going to acquire, how long are they going to stay, how many transactions they're going to make, how valuable will those transactions be, and then combining it all together to say that's what we think revenue is. Okay, so we're deriving this. We're not modeling it directly, and we're doing a pretty good job of it. Gives you that good feeling in the belly that we can take this curve, we can take these underlying components and project them out into the future. And we can project them out pretty far. Then we can do a little bit of accounting stuff to turn it into an overall corporate valuation. So that's what we're going to do. So on the next slide, I want to point out two things before I bedazzle you with it. Number one, we're going to start with this curve over here. We're going to say, all right, look, we've captured revenue through May of 2017. Let's go beyond it. So you're going to see that curve all compressed and at 50 years to the right of it. 50 projected years. Number two, we recognize that not all models are perfect. It's just that some suck less than others. And so we're going to acknowledge that there could be errors in each one of our models. So we allow for each one of our curves to be slightly different. So I'm going to show you several hundred, maybe several thousand different trajectories that Wayfair's revenue could take on. And here it is. There's the revenues through middle of 2017, and there's a very bleak future. Again, I give this company a lot of credit for its successes to date and for the metrics that they share, but it is not a pretty picture. That acquisitions are growing too fast and too expensively. They're acquiring a lot of very bad customers, and they haven't established enough of a base of repeat buying that when acquisitions level off, which they will do, they must. Usually what happens with most companies is when acquisitions peak, there's enough established base of ongoing repeat buying that you don't even notice it. I mean, did any of you notice when Amazon's acquisitions peaked? Nah, because the repeat buying was so high that it was all good. This company will crash. It might crash this year, as some retail experts are saying. It might crash in, I don't know, our best guess is sometime in the mid-2020s. I don't know. But they're just imbalanced in their allocations. And, well, let's take each one of these numbers and turn it into a valuation. Here we go. In May of 2017, the company was trading for $65 a share. We come up with a mean stock price of 10. And we're right. Well, time will tell. Interesting to see that this simple academic paper had quite an impact on the stock price. In September of 2017, the stock was trading in the mid-80s. The day the paper came out, Wayfair had the biggest drop in its stock price in a couple of years, and it just kind of kept on going from there. And it was just really interesting to see the way that people picked up on it, including our own Philly guy, Jim Cramer.
Say the prolific left, he's really into this one, struck again when he tweeted his support of an academic paper published by professors at Emory in the University of Pennsylvania, calling it the smartest piece ever written on Wayfair. It did the job, causing Wayfair to plunge from 83 to 70 as of today. What was so devastating about a high-level academic paper? The professors tried to come up with a way to pin a value on Wayfair's current and future customers based on how much they make from these customers versus how much they spend to acquire them.
Let's think about this for a second. Let me just kind of tone it down, Jim. The professors said that they're going to figure out the value of the company by looking at the value of the customers and the cost of acquisition. What's your reaction to that? I'll tell you what your reaction should be. Your reaction should be, duh. That's how every company should be valued. Instead of just looking at this almost meaningless overall revenue stream, let's decompose it into the stuff that really matters. It really reflects what this company is all about and build it up from there. And so that's the kind of thing that I've been really pushing, both primarily as a way just to kind of make the customer-centric thing happen. But here's my new startup. If you're interested in this, I'm not here to sell it, but if you're interested in some of these ideas about how we can revolutionize finance through customer-based corporate valuation, to basically take these principles of customer centricity and bring them to a very different audience, to get the CFO and the VP of Investor Relations on board as well, to say, tell me more about those methods. And hey, you guys in marketing, you might want to see these models over here. They're kind of interesting. That's the conversation that I want to create. And so far, so good. And I hope it's been so far so good for all of you as well. Those are our four principles of our Customer Centricity Manifesto. Let me hand it over to Sarah to wrap it up, and then we'd love to get some questions from you.
Awesome. Thanks, Pete. Okay, so beyond the manifesto, just some quick takeaways for you. So we'd like you to join the Customer Centricity Revolution. That's why we wrote the book. We hope you'll read the book. It's really little, easy to carry around in your pocket, and a nice quick read. But really our goal was, like I said, is to distill these ideas and provide that call to action and not be kind of in that academic sphere, although it really is grounded in academic research and also business research, but to really give a clear roadmap for how to implement customer centricity in your organization. Second, we'd love you to sign the manifesto. Third, integrating the essential frameworks that Pete and I have been talking about here today, also in the book. Also, if you Google Pete Fader, of course, there are plenty of other pieces where he's providing advice that would be incredibly useful for you to follow into your everyday business practice. The one thing that I've found really interesting in this journey of customer centricity, I've had the opportunity to interview a lot of folks in the business world when we were putting the book together. Pete and I are writing articles currently, also putting this presentation together, is every single organization that I've spoken to who are now mature in customer centricity, they all started small. They all started with teeny tiny experiments. Often it was actually middle managers or data scientists who had an inkling that something wasn't quite right. And there was ways to really define and fine-tune their strategies around customer lifetime value. When I talked to the folks over at the LA Dodgers, they actually made a lot of mistakes for a number of years when they were trying to experiment with CLV. But those mistakes really have helped them now where they are with their use of CLV in their business. So it's really interesting. And this is a key point, is living it, experimenting. Our call to action in the book is really quite literally diving in and just start getting to work. And then last but not least, so I lead the simulation team at the Wharton School. The simulations really hold a tremendous amount of power. They provide folks with an opportunity to roll up their sleeves, think about something like a simulation, a way to bring your teams together and really experience what it's like becoming familiar with customer centricity and laying out that roadmap. And so when Pete and I reflect on sort of where we've come from and where we're going, you know, we really hope that something like our manifesto is really going to remove this question mark, and we are going to see customer lifetime value become a common metric in every single business, and it will become a way to really drive strategy forward. So I want to thank everybody for coming today. Do you have any closing remarks, Pete?
No, we'd love to get your questions.
We would love to get questions. So. Yes, we would.
Great. Thanks very much. All right. Got a couple of microphones here. What do y'all think? Huh? Please.
Thank you so much. That was very, very interesting approach. We really appreciate it. I do have a question. You mentioned the customer centricity components of revenue. Any advice that you can give us in terms of how to lead those conversations with the customers, given that we have so many variety of them and their business models are very different? What would be a couple of key questions that we can ask our clients to identify those components for their business models?
Sure. And I really have to say that moving the conversation over to, or at least starting the conversation with the folks in finance and then kind of backing into marketing has been incredible to get that kind of a broad buy-in, and especially from an audience that's not as afraid of models and forecasts and so on. So here's the question. Do you want to know what your company's worth? I mean, it's as simple as that. And most of the time we're working with private equity firms, late-stage VCs, who are looking at a company they want to acquire. But it becomes really interesting when we're looking at a company, and they just know internally that they're really worth a lot more than the market seems to be saying, and they can't quite come up with that rationale for it. So they'll turn to us to say, so what are we really worth in terms of the value of our customers? So they can come up with the number, hopefully higher than what Wall Street thinks, and then make a whole big deal about it. Not only that the number's higher, but to explain why. That we've actually been acquiring more customers. They're staying around longer than you think. And again, that translates directly into the marketing and other operational kinds of issues. So I really think that sometimes starting on the finance side, or maybe doing that at least in parallel while you're doing the less unusual but still difficult marketing tactics, but bringing it all together, I think, is a very, very convincing way to say that this stuff's for real.
Thank you.
Look, I'm in teaching mode right now.
Yeah.
I will cold call. So,
I have a question.
Please.
So I think if there was like the anti-book for this, it would be How Brands Grow. No.
No.
So yeah, so could you reconcile those two areas?
I can, and of course I can get into a pretty technical explanation of it, but I won't. If you don't know How Brands Grow by Byron Sharp, I actually highly recommend it, because he doesn't talk about the models or anything like that, but the models that I'm talking about are very, very, very similar to the models that are underlying a lot of his principles. So I actually agree with most of what he's saying. I agree with the idea that when you have that incremental dollar to spend, Byron Sharp says, grow your base, you must have more buyers. I agree, but for a different reason. I say, let's focus more on acquisition. Let's go out there and find more valuable customers and not worry so much about trying to fatten up the ones that we have. So it's actually a lot of alignment with it. Now, there are some differences, and I have the ultimate love-hate relationship with Byron Sharp. And just to kind of summarize the biggest difference, The CLV distribution that I showed, the fact that we got this tail of people out there that kind of sticks out, I was going to say like a sore thumb, but a very healthy thumb. He doesn't really believe in that. He kind of believes that it's not he believes in heterogeneity, but not that there's as much of a kind of a skew to it as we see in the actual data. So a lot of my career has been taking the kinds of models that Byron Sharp and other folks have been building, and then kind of adding slight little bells and whistles to them to kind of capture reality a little bit better. So the basic fundamental principles, double jeopardy, all that kind of stuff holds, but there's actually more to it, and then it leads to other kinds of advice. So we're actually, it might seem surprising, and I don't blame you for thinking that way, but there's a surprising amount of alignment there.
Great, thank you.
And I will even say that, as we were pulling those together, and I was, trying to get Sarah into this world, one of the early things that I did, maybe one of the first books I pulled off the shelf, was that red-covered book. So you got to read this one too.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. So we have a question here from, I'm not sure where, but I'll read it. Is CLV reserved to relatively large companies with a lot of resources, or is it applicable to small companies as well? So Pete, do you want to take a stab, or you want?
Go for it first.
Okay, all right. So, so what we think here is that these are universal principles for sure. When you're thinking about your customers, it's also one thing you have to be worried about is the overinvestment, right? So if you're overinvesting in customers that really aren't worth it, that's something that will happen to you regardless of the size of your company. The other thing that we work really hard at in the book, in fact, we've structured the book in such a way that we're trying to train your eye to look at acquisition, retention, development, and then understand time. There's a time component to that, where you are in the maturity of your company, whether you're large or small, and how that changes your tactics. So we're talking about being nimble, about experimenting, like I said before, about testing your hypotheses. And these are principles, especially in the era of data that we're in, that are applicable whether you're large or small.
And let me just add to that, because in an era where every day we're talking about the retail apocalypse and all this kind of thing, I'm actually very hopeful about it. And I think that the future arises from the small companies. Those digitally native, direct-to-consumer companies, many of which are right around here, I don't want to say that they're kind of textbook customer centricity examples, but they're a heck of a lot better than their older, bigger, slower brethren. And so again, implicitly or explicitly, they're starting to embrace a lot of these ideas. They're starting to tag and track customers, calculate CLVs a lot earlier than traditional companies would. And what's happening is those big old companies are starting to take them a lot more seriously. Instead of dismissing them as a passing fad or just a little teeny tiny niche, they're saying we can learn a lot from them. You know what? Let's hire some of them to start running our marketing or our whole company. So I think a lot of these ideas are kind of working their way up. And sometimes it's the little companies leading the way. Rodney.
Hey, hi. Thank you guys both for today. Kind of related to that last point, is there a certain threshold, not so much size of company, but maybe threshold of data, right, that you need? So for instance, do you need 5,000 customers or 5 million? Do you need 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years of transaction data to actually make that model work? Like, what's the thresholds? Because that will definitely tell us you may be a small company growing very rapidly, but then you hit a certain threshold of customers, but you don't have enough years or enough data to actually make the model work. Any thoughts or guidance?
Absolutely. And I sort of almost implicitly answered the question when I was talking about the kinds of companies that we work with on customer-based corporate valuation. I said late-stage VCs. You can't really do it at the early stages for exactly the reasons you pointed out, that you don't have enough customers to really see or estimate that full CLV distribution. And in terms of the kind of length of the runway that you need, it's kind of interesting that I don't need a long runway of data. I need enough customers, but I don't need a long amount of time in order to estimate these models. But I still don't really trust them until I have about 2 or 3 years. And why is that? Because one of the issues that we haven't spoken about, but we make a big deal about it in the book, and I can't say enough about it in practice, are cohorts of customers. We always run these models for a given group of customers, generally who we acquired at the same time. And the issue is that the cohorts are not all created equal. and that as we go over time, as we get that first cohort of customers we acquired soon after we were founded, they tend to be much better customers. And so we don't want to just kind of calculate CLVs on them and say, we're an amazing company, let's raise some more capital. So we need enough time to see a bunch of the different cohorts. We have to connect the dots across them. We've got to watch them start to stabilize a little bit so we can anticipate what the subsequent and the kind of steady state mature cohorts are going to look like. So yes, we do need enough customers to see the heterogeneity. We do need enough of a runway to see the cross-cohort dynamics. And obviously, we do need enough, cleanliness of data to trust those results in the first place. Sometimes these models that I endorse, sometimes they're too good, that they'll work really well even when you kind of put in crappy data and it gives you this false sense of security about it. So all the issues you raised are right on the money. And with that in mind, I recognize that most companies aren't born to do customer centricity right out of the gate. They're going to be born around a particular product. We just want them to look ahead and start doing all that tagging and tracking. Because 2-3 years later, maybe it's time to do that pivot towards it. But it's going to take some time.
Great, thank you.
Good thing. I don't know if, we don't want to hold people hostage here. We'll see if there's time for any other pressing issues. If not, you got our contact info over here. And we are absolutely delighted to keep the conversation going. As I said before, this really is the first time that we've presented this content. The book's only been out for a few weeks. So we're very much open not only to questions, but feedback, and just kind of tell us how we can spread the gospel of customer centricity and how we can help you do it more effectively as well. So with that, I want to thank Neil and the rest of the team over here for giving us this opportunity, and for all of you for taking the time, and best wishes on your customer-centric journey.